Since 1989, UFOs, crop circles, and alien beings have been sighted over Israel.
Between March of 1993 and June of 1993, there were at least 5 visitations.
There have been multiple instances throughout history where UFO sightings occurred in concentrated waves over specific regions, lasting weeks or even months. One of the most infamous examples took place in July 1952, when Washington, D.C. was flooded with reports of flying saucers, or in more recent times, the bizarre drones of 2024. Today, we're diving into a much more obscure UFO wave that lasted well over a few years, one with so many consistent details across sightings involving people who don't know each other that it becomes nearly impossible to overlook. I am referring to, of course, the UFO and humanoid encounters of Israel in the 1990s. On September 28, 1987, a 27-year-old auto mechanic named Ami Akra'i was driving south of Haifa in Israel, near Sheikh Mona Beach. He noticed an object hovering low over the sand, and initially thought it was a helicopter in distress. He realized it was a disc-shaped craft. The object emitted a bright red flash and then disappeared. 2 days later, Akra'i returned to the location with ufologist Hadassah Arbel, who had been contacted after police referred the case. At the site, they reported a large imprint in the sand. The mark was described as an elliptical shape, approximately 15 meters wide, burned into the surface. Some of the vegetation within the imprint were not burned. According to their observations, these areas appeared to form an image resembling a figure facing what looked like a control panel. Samples of the sand were taken and were analyzed several years later. During testing, the sand reportedly reacted unusually to heat, softening under relatively low temperatures. Laboratory analysis suggested the presence of a low-melting hydrocarbon coating on the sand particles. Investigators involved in the testing stated they cannot identify a clear natural or man-made explanation for these findings. It only gets weirder from here. On June 8th of the following year, less than 9 months after the first report, another saucer-shaped symbol was burned into the sands of Sheikh Mona Beach, very similar to the first imprint and just 100 yards away. Not much is known about this next report, other than that on April 27th of 1989, 2 teenagers witnessed an unidentified flying object explode into thousands of shards over Sheikh Mona Beach. The sightings would dim for the next few years, but would kick into high gear in 1991 and 1993. Not only were the UFOs still being reported, but the pilots of these crafts were soon to be sighted too. According to Canadian-Israeli writer Barry Chamish in his book Return of the Giants, which covers this bizarre wave of UFOs, an 11-year-old boy of Yemenite origin disappeared for half a day while walking home from school sometime in 1991. When he finally returned to his hysterical parents late at night, he was unable to remember why he was so late and had no recollection of the previous hours. 2 weeks later, he remembered that he had been abducted by giants and taken into their lair. There he was medically examined and a small device was surgically inserted into his left arm, near the wrist. He was later supposedly taken to a clinic, where a small device was removed from his arm. On the night of November 6, 1991, in Beit Shean, a bizarre silver giant materialized in the home of police chief Yitzchak Mordecai. The creature then fled his home, and Mordecai alerted his co-workers to what he had seen, leading to a 6-hour chase involving 300 soldiers and 19 jeeps, chasing the humanoid all the way to the border of Jordan. The being is said to have stopped at the border fence and disappeared. Some sources claim a huge triangular UFO was present as well. While this story is interesting and I do think it has credibility, I do find it hard to believe that there were 300 soldiers involved. Perhaps there was a translation error or some other mistake in the report. Sometime in March of 1993, the exact date and time is unknown, a woman only known as Mara was relaxing in her home in Kadima when she felt her entire house begin to shake intensely. In the report, the things that were shaking her house were described as strange forces. These strange forces shook the house so hard that an air conditioning unit fell out of its case and crashed inside her house. She then began to hear voices that were calling out to her using her childhood name. It stated that she determined the house was very haunted and moved far away from Kadima. While no entities or UFOs were reported, the timing and location align with other cases in the wave. Around 3 a.m. in the morning on March 30th, 1993, a woman named Aviva Carmel was unable to sleep and felt drawn to leave her bed and go outside. There, she claimed to have witnessed a silver craft land on her property. She described how the front touched down first, then the rear. She estimated the size and shape of the craft to be similar to a fruit silo, about 60 feet in circumference. She approached the object to investigate and, from about 20 feet away, saw a tall humanoid nearby. He was 2.5 meters tall and wore silver foil coveralls that clung to the body like a second skin. He wore a helmet, but its tinted visor prevented her from seeing the creature's face. The next day, Carmel ventured into her backyard and saw the imprint of the craft. It was a circle about 22 feet in diameter. It stated in the report that plant life outside the imprint had decayed. The night after Aviva's encounter, her neighbor, although unnamed in the investigation, had a very similar encounter with the silver giants. Late at night on March 31st, the witness woke up to her entire house shaking tremendously. When she opened her eyes, she saw, in her own words, a bald giant, 7 to 8 feet tall, with round yellow eyes and a small flat nose, dressed in gray metallic overalls, standing next to her bed. The being told her telepathically not to be afraid, and it wouldn't harm her, and watched as the humanoid began to glide around her room for an unknown duration of time. The next morning, 2 more circles were found, 20 and 11 feet in diameter, pressed down by a centrifugal force. Shoshana Yahud is the treasurer of the town of Kadima. It's very apparent to the ufologists that she spoke with that she wants as little as possible to do with her experience, as she isn't too interested in UFOs and the like. In May of 1993, she awoke to see a 7-foot-tall, round-faced being in silvery overalls circling her bed, as if he was quote-unquote floating on his shoes. The creature assured her that he was not there to harm her, and she calmed herself. After a few minutes, the humanoid phased through her outside wall. Shoshana thought she had dreamed the incident until she looked outside her window in the morning and saw a crop circle in her backyard that was 15 feet in diameter. Ufologists examined the landing prints and found a reddish liquid covering it. Strangely, they found it to be cadmium and silicone. In the early morning of April 20th, in 1993, Ziparet Carmel woke up earlier than usual and went to her kitchen. As she entered, she noticed the room was covered in a strange light. She stepped outside to look for the source, and as she walked around the storage shed, she saw what appeared to be a large fruit silo in a nearby field. Taking a closer look, she realized the object was silver in color and square in shape, with what appeared to be 18 glowing square windows along its side. 5 huge beams of powerful light shone from its top into the sky. Suddenly, a second section of the object seemed to materialize, doubling its size. Then, a 7-foot-tall man-like figure appeared near the object. Carmel's dogs reacted violently at the sight of it. The figure wore a metallic overall and what looked like a sombrero-like helmet, with a veil completely covering its face. The figure and Carmel stared at each other for about 30 seconds. She then quietly whispered, "Why don't you take your hat off so I can see your face?" In response, she heard a clear voice inside her head, speaking in Hebrew. This is the way it should be. She then felt compelled to return to her kitchen and went back to bed. Later, during a search of the field near the home, a strange outline about 4.5 meters long was discovered in the grass. It was covered in an unknown foul-smelling substance that caused nausea. The material was later identified as highly pure silicone. Within 10 days, 2 more circles were found outside Ziparet's backyard. This time, they were soaked with a red liquid, later identified as liquid cadmium. This substance would become a recurring feature in subsequent landing circles, sourced from Barry Chamish in his novel Return of the Giants, along with the spring 1995 edition of UFO Universe. Batia Shimon was a resident of Rishon LeZion, and on one night of May in 1993, she had a very bizarre encounter, yet now sounds familiar to us. She reported encountering an 8-foot-tall humanoid with fascinating blue eyes, dressed in silver coveralls, that appeared in her bedroom and glided through her apartment. The incident repeated itself the next night when Batia followed the creature and saw a mushroom-shaped craft surrounded by searchlights hovering outside her house. A hatch opened, which looked like dark glass, and 2 other giants stepped out. The next thing she felt was a pressure on her shoulders. She was then blinded by the bright light and found herself back on her bed with one of the giants standing next to her, the other one further away. She heard a voice in her head exclaim, "Don't be afraid." She could not reply since she was paralyzed, and her husband was deep asleep next to her. The beings glided, surrounded by fluorescent light, out of her bedroom window, back to their craft. The next morning, Batia found a powder that consisted of mainly cadmium on the floor of her house. It was 2 a.m. on May 13th of 1993, and Kadima resident Danny Rotem was unable to sleep, so he decided to go for a night drive to clear his mind. He drove near the forest and saw an object shaped like a large egg on the ground. He left his car immediately, and then a tiny being, maybe 1.5 meters tall, appeared to him. The creature told Danny that they were waiting for him. The humanoid floated in front of the witness as he walked to the ship. He does not remember how he got inside, but he realized that inside the object, it seemed much larger inside than it appeared outside. In the middle of the room was a pillar with an enormous pedestal. He counted 13 aliens in the room, but only 2 led the witness to a side chamber where he was laid on a very comfortable sofa. He was told telepathically not to worry, that he was on a mission, and that he'll know what it is in time. They then made an incision on his left wrist. His next memory was being back inside his car, traveling home. It didn't state the appearance of the beings in the report, but I figured I'd be doing a disservice if I didn't include this case. Sourced from UFOs in Israel, past and present. Sometime in late May of 1993, though the exact date is unknown, a strong light woke Batia Shimon at around 3 a.m. The light came through her kitchen window. Shimon, who had been involved in a previous, similar encounter, got up and looked outside. There, she saw a large, mushroom-shaped object descending from the sky, with what appeared to be a clear door. The light then focused on her shoulder, striking her with a force that felt like a strong punch. Her next memory was being back in bed, watching a tall humanoid slowly wave its hand above her husband's head. The being communicated with her telepathically, telling her to stay calm and that they were not there to harm her. While this visitor remained in the bedroom, another moved throughout the house, though not on foot. It floated upright, its legs completely still. A few days later, toward the end of May, Batia woke to find the giants had returned. Once again, one stood beside the bed, waving its hand over her husband's head, while the other explored her apartment. Both figures shone like neon and wore skin-tight white outfits. The second giant eventually returned to the bedroom and gestured to its companion. The two then glided to the adjacent room, where Shimon's son was sleeping. Instead of doing anything threatening, the being simply stood there, seemingly fascinated by the aquarium in the room. Moments later, a beam of light shone through her kitchen window again. The towering figures and the light disappeared once more. On the night of May 30th in 1993, a woman named Hannah Somek in Bergada, about 3 miles from Kadima, had arguably the most horrifying encounter with these entities. At around 3 a.m., she was awakened by her dog barking frantically in the garden. She went downstairs into the kitchen and looked outside through a glass door, only to be shocked as she saw her dog suddenly fly through the air and slam into a wall. She rushed to the door to confront whoever had done it, but as she stepped outside, an invisible force had stopped her, preventing her from moving any further. Moments later, she saw a tall humanoid, described as being 7 to 8 feet in height, with a round face and wearing bright metallic overalls. The creature was standing near her pickup truck, appearing to examine it. At first, she wondered if it could be a robber, but that idea quickly faded when she heard a voice inside her head asking, "You think I'm a thief?" Angrily, Hannah demanded what the creature did to her dog. The entity replied telepathically, "He disturbed me, as you do now. I could crush you like an ant if I wanted to. Go away, I am busy. Go back to your husband." Frightened, Hannah ran back upstairs to get her husband. But when they returned, the being had vanished. Outside, they discovered large footprints in the garden, reportedly around 16 inches long. A 4.5-meter circle of flattened grass was also found in the backyard, soaked with, once again, liquid cadmium. Similar circles would appear in the area in the days that followed, again containing the same substance. In the aftermath of the encounter, Hannah reportedly suffered from fatigue, headaches, and muscle pain. In Holon, a vague report indicated that several humanoid giants visited a woman named Klara Kahanov at her home one night. No other information was given. Sourced by Barry Chamish in UFO Universe in the fall of 1995. Another encounter occurred in June of 1993, this time in Kfar Saba. An unnamed witness had gone into her bedroom to sleep late at night when she encountered what appeared to be a 3-dimensional entity standing less than a meter away from her. The being was very tall and was wearing a silver-green spacesuit. It emitted white beams of light from its waist area. The witness felt an intense energy emanating from the beams of light, which traversed her whole body. She described it as a joyful feeling. The being then took several small steps and then vanished. At around 9 p.m. on the night of December 22nd of 1994, Danny Ezra and Herzl Casatini were relaxing at Casatini's house. Earlier that day, the two men had videotaped a bizarre object that was hovering in the sky. They then suddenly heard an explosion that shook the entire house, and Casatini opened the door to investigate. He was confronted by a 9-foot-tall giant wearing metallic coveralls, standing in front of the house. A glowing haze blurred the giant's facial features. He slammed the door and motioned his friend to the window to look. The men stared at the giant for about 15 seconds before Casatini called the police. When the police arrived, the giant had vanished, but they discovered deep boot tracks in the hard mud. The footprints sank 35 centimeters into the ground, meaning whoever left them had to have weighed quite literally a ton. The tracks carried on for about 8 kilometers, and sometimes the distance between the tracks was 12 feet. Most bizarre, the report also states that the fruit trees which were growing near the tracks produced genetically altered fruits the summer following the incident. On a Saturday morning sometime in January of 1995, just 2 miles from Kadima in Moshav Parat, a woman named Rachel Gueta awoke to hear her dog whining in pain. She found that her dog had both of its eyes completely removed, with no blood anywhere near the enucleations. It's reported that after she found the dog, it died 20 minutes later. She ran to her sheep pen outside and saw all 3 of her sheep brutally mutilated. The cheeks of their faces had been entirely shaved, and in the sheep were multiple holes 2 centimeters in diameter, drilled to the bone. All of the blood had been drained, and even more disturbingly, the animals would not rot, even 5 months after being thrown in the dump. Next, she went to her chicken coop and found all 35 birds frozen dead in their roosts. There had been no panic among them at the time of death. Outside the coop was a 4.5-meter crop circle, once again, typical to what we have seen thus far. On January 12th of 1995, Hannah Somek would have yet another encounter with the Silver Giants, almost 2 years after her first incident, although thankfully, this one was more indirect. Hannah Somek felt the presence of a giant humanoid watching over her bed late that night, so she ran the 100 yards from her house to her mother's, where her mother comforted her. The next morning, they saw landing prints on Hannah's lawn, near her daughter's bedroom window. Sourced from Barry Chamish's Return of the Giants. The day after Hannah's second encounter with the Silver Monsters, ufologist Zvi Bagest took several photographs of the circles found on the ground of Hannah Smek's property, along with odd shards of a shiny metal, later found to be pure silicone. Some of the shards weighed well over a pound. When the aforementioned photographs were developed, several tall figures could be seen standing at a distance, apparently observing the proceedings. Sourced from Flying Saucer Review, Volume 41. In March of 1995, 4 women residing in Afula reported seeing an oversized, hairy floating head in their apartment garden for 20 minutes before the appearance of a 7-foot-tall giant in the adjacent parking lot that sent them fleeing in terror. An interesting note to add is that all of the witnesses felt the giant was a female. This was once again reported by Barry Chamish in Flying Saucer Review, Volume 41. In the middle of March of 1995, a woman in Ramat Hasharon observed a giant metallic figure in her garden. Plaster casts were taken of huge footprints left on the scene. The forms of the feet bore similarities to other prints found at previous locations where sightings of these giants occurred. Late one night in June of 1996, in the Moshav of Givati, a farmer named Chaim Matal was checking on his horse. He claimed to have seen 3 short-looking humanoids in silver clothing that were apparently mutilating his horse. The horse had very strange mutilations on it, but no further details were provided. The source of this information comes from the ufology group, Gephuk, in Brazil. This entry is one of the best documented sightings on this timeline, occurring at 2:30 a.m. on August 4th of 1996. Over 1,000 people in the city of Eilat watched as a UFO traveled slowly over the city at a height of 200 meters above ground. Local police stations and emergency centers were deluged with dozens of reported sightings. An eyewitness to the event was the son of the deputy mayor of Eilat. His testimony states that he likened the UFO to a giant tent full of lights, and the whole ordeal lasted around 10 minutes. He and other observers also strangely claimed that the UFO was semicircle shaped, which then split into 2 smaller UFOs, and then instantaneously disappeared without warning. In a similar sighting in the same month, August 1996, the deputy editor of the local paper in Eilat reported an enormous red and purple boomerang-shaped UFO, which was the size of half of a city, splitting in 2, and then floating above the city of Aqaba, and disappearing above Jordan. According to published reports, in September of 1996, in the village of Netanya, an estimated 5,000 people were terrified when a UFO descended between a group of nearby buildings, and the event was witnessed by numerous local officials, including at least 10 police cars. At 2 a.m. on Tuesday, September 17, 1996, traffic on High Road in the Ramat Aviv section of Tel Aviv came to a standstill when a UFO was hovering nearby the city. Tel Aviv police received dozens of calls about a lighted object doing aerial acrobatics over the northern end of the city that were considered impossible for any conventional flying plane or helicopter. On July 22nd of 1997, in Arad, several residents reported seeing a flying silvery figure over the area. The report states that the figure had a silver frozen face, but not much of a description was given. Others saw an object that was emitting flashing lights toward the ground. Sources, once again, Barry Chamish in Return of the Giants. On the afternoon of October 10th, 1997, 16-year-old Muhan Faras was walking home from school in Tulkarm when he spotted a strange figure. The creature was dark green in color, had a strange growth on its face, had 2 tiny hands with 3 fingers on each, along with long disgusting fingernails. It made a threatening gesture toward Muhan, and then screamed in an unintelligible language, which it then flew up into the sky and vanished. Sourced from UFO Roundup by Joseph Traynor. This report came in on the same day and location as the previous entry, in Tulkarm on October 10th. In the evening, local engineer Raid Anam saw a black creature in the sky. He told police investigators that he saw an outline of a figure, and that it was a human with 2 arms and 2 legs. It flew fast over the area, quickly disappearing. The source of said story is only labeled as being from Israeli UFO research. On the night of July 13th in 1999, several different villagers reported encountering misty humanoids after hearing their farm animals in distress. The figures were described as human in appearance, but either small, half the size of a normal man, or large, 1.5 to 2 times larger. They were seen just outside the homes of 3 of the locals, and were reported as hazy, as though they were formed of cigarette smoke. An umbrella-shaped pictogram or crop circle was found on a nearby field around the same time. By the late 1990s, the wave of sightings had largely subsided. Despite the number of reports and recurring details, no definitive explanation has ever been confirmed, leaving the Israel wave as one of the most unusual clusters of humanoid encounters on record. It's a blessing that we don't only have word-of-mouth testimonies regarding these otherworldly events, but video footage as well. Here's a compilation of some of the best pieces of evidence that I have found regarding this UFO wave. The sources of these videos will have links in the description. I highly recommend you look into these as well.
אני בו. מה זה, יש לו חלון נכון למעלה? מצד שמאל. מצד שמאל, אפשר להתקרב עוד? יש מסגרת. רגע, עכשיו אתה מאמין?
אבל עכשיו זה כבר נברח.
עכשיו אתה מאמין או שעכשיו אתה אומר לי זה כלום?
נכון שברח לך?
לא ברח לי. לא,
אני צריכה להביא את החצובה, זה
ברח לי.
ברח לך. טוב, אני אוציא לך מהזום.
הנה, בסדר, אתה צריכה ללכת לקדימה.
כן?
צריך לעלות אפשר ב4, צריכה לקרב עוד.
כתוב שם זום 2 למטה?
זום 1 כתוב.
As noted in the intro, many consistencies in the reports are hard to ignore when reviewed. Most of the direct encounters with the silver giants are reported by adult women in their late 30s, except for the rare instances where 2 men saw it on their porch, or when the Yemenite boy was abducted by giants in 1991. Barry Chamish, the ufologist I mentioned countless times already, was the investigator for most, if not all, of these reports. He interviewed the mostly women victims and saw firsthand how it affected them. He would later publish his findings and their testimonies in a book I mentioned, Return of the Giants, and they were also documented in UFO magazines, including Volume 41 of Flying Saucer Review and the spring and fall editions of UFO Universe. The reason he called his book Return of the Giants is due to the fact that he surmises these silver creatures are not aliens, but rather the Nephilim from biblical times. The first mention of the Nephilim beings is in Genesis 6, verse 4. A third of the percentage of angels in heaven tried to take heaven for themselves due to pride, siding with Lucifer. As a result, they were rightfully banished from heaven, and while they were falling to hell, they procreated with the daughters of man, aka the women of earth. Their offspring are known as Nephilim, a wicked hybrid of angel and human. Descriptions of their characteristics are often debated, but universally, they had a tall stature and were very strong. Chumash believes that these beasts have returned to the Holy Land of Israel for reasons unknown to us, though an interesting claim, as both the giants of the Bible and the giants of Israel in the 90s were focused on encountering women. Both instances of the giants are noted as descending from the sky as well. Chumash ends his book stating the following: in biblical times, there was a war between Israel, the Philistines, the giants, and God. Today, the battle lines are drawn between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and the giants are back, so where is God? Since the late 90s, there haven't been any similar sightings in Israel specifically, or waves of humanoid sightings remotely similar to the giant's appearance. It does make you wonder, was there really something to this unnerving wave of humanoid encounters and UFO visitations? Is it really somehow connected to the Bible? Was it all mass hysteria or some other rational explanation? If it wasn't, will they come back? Have they visited once more since, and has it gone undocumented? Perhaps, just maybe, the Nephilim did return.